silence, but I guess from now on, let's stay silent. Oh, so in the chat, we got the icon to start. So it is my very, very great pleasure to open this session at the Freedom Games, which we will discuss cultural identity and should the EU create a cultural identity. My name is Csaba Toth, and I will be the moderator for this session. And now that we have sorted all the technical problems, I believe we will have an exciting session. It's great to meet all of you virtually. It's a shame that we cannot have this year the Freedom Games present and cannot meet you all in person, but I'm sure that we will have a discussion nonetheless. Just the technical information. If any of you panelists have anything important to say, you can do it on the chat icon. Let me introduce our panelists for today. Mr. Christoph Bartmann, who is the director of Goethe Institute Warsaw and has been a literary critic before. It's Monica Sassatelli, who is a cultural sociologist at the University of Bologna and has had a number of projects based on European cultural identity, like looking at the European cities of culture and how they create identity issues. Ms. Agnieszka Holland, a famous and famed film director from Holland, and who is also now, as I understand, the president of the European Film Academy. Ms. Salima Belhaj, who is a member of the Dutch Parliament in the Netherlands for the Dutch Progressive Party, Progressive Liberal Party, sorry, D66, and who is her party spokesperson on the culture and the arts. And I don't know if I pronounced this well, but Guillermo Escribano, who is the deputy head of mission from Spain to Warsaw, so and has been involved in cultural issues as well. As to myself, my name is Csaba Toth. I now work in the European Parliament as Chief of Staff of one of our vice presidents for the Renew Group, Katalin Cseh. But the reason I'm here is I used to run Republican Institute, liberal think tank in Hungary, and I have written books on issues like the politics of science fiction, how we can teach politics and sociology from works of culture and popular culture. So I believe we all have some sort of a connection to culture, identity, Europeanism, all the issues that we need to discuss here today. And I'm sure I can discuss with any one of you any of these issues in a longer time than what we have, but we only have 45 minutes now. So as I said before, I will ask just one question in the beginning, which will consist of 2 sub-questions, and I will ask each of you to respond in 2 or 3 minutes, and I will interrupt you after 2 or 3 minutes so that we can have a discussion. And the question is simple. First of all, what do you see as uniting us, maybe in a cultural manner, as Europeans? And should the EU, the European Union, use any of this, or should the European Union do anything to actually create a cultural identity, which is, of course, the question of our panel. So what do you believe is our core European identity, and should the EU do something to create? And I will ask you to respond in the order that I said your name. So the first, Mr. Christoph Bartmann, please go.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. Good morning. Great to be here with you today. Pity that we cannot be in Łódź. I love Łódź. I would have loved to be there. Maybe there'll be other opportunities. Thanks for these great questions on an important topic. I have been reflecting about these questions, especially after the panel came up and the questions came up, and I came to the conclusion that creating a European identity, cultural identity, is a tricky thing. But I would at least admit that there is something like European cultural identity, and you mostly or best feel it when you are not in Europe, when you are somewhere else. Like when I was in the US before I came to Warsaw, I was in New York also for the Goethe Institute. And I remember at times I felt strongly European. What does that mean? That does mean that I felt as a continental European, not being member of the Anglosphere of Anglo-America. I did not feel much as a German especially, but more like a central continental European. I had some nostalgic thoughts or feelings of belonging to landscapes, atmospheres, moods, which I would somehow associate as being Central Europeans. I started dreaming of, say, Lithuania or Poland or Austria, and sometimes also Germany. So that makes my European cultural identity. It has many, many layers. And second point, they cannot be created because they are already there. And what the European Union cannot do or should not do, and hopefully will not do, is start creating a European cultural identity. But this would probably be a terrible misunderstanding and misreading of what the European Union is about and what cultural identity is about. Technically spoken, from how I interpret the European treaties, it's not even the task of the European Union to create something as European cultural identity. I have it here noted here, it has at least, it's good enough if it supports, coordinates, and supplements efforts being carried out by the national states. And if this is done, and this is done also in many complex ways, then this is already a great achievement. And I'm absolutely pro-European, and I'm glad about seeing results of European cultural policies without the a bit totalitarian idea of creating a new or something European cultural identity. Thanks.
Thank you for this answer. Thank you for keeping a time frame. I should have said that I'm personally from Budapest, Hungary, so I can very much empathize with the Mitteleuropa
yes.
Landscape. Monica Sassatelli, you come from a different part of Europe. What's your answer to the questions?
Yes, thank you for the questions, and sorry for the headphones disaster. So yeah, I come from Italy and I lived in the UK for a long time. I'm back in Italy now. So, well, I think as an academic, these are sort of impossible questions. That's decidedly in 2 minutes, but also in a longer time. Also, they are very different in the sense that first, you ask about the core of what makes Europeans share something, and then about the EU. Now, the Europeans and the EU are not the same thing. And there is a risk of confusing them. And the second problem with the question is that the question is very factual. Is there a core? Should the European create an identity, the EU? And I think the issue with identities is that they are not just factual things. It is important if we share a core, but it's almost more important if we think we share a core, if there is a narrative, a joint awareness of sharing a core. But that's a different matter. So I think that, they're very interesting questions, but they're also much more complicated than they sound. Already they sound complicated, but they are even more. And so this would be sort of the scholarly, cautious answer. But then if I want to try, given that we are in the freedom games, to try and give a more, more spontaneous answer, if you like, then I think that it's important to find a core. We could do a list, the Greco-Roman heritage and all that. Or we could just say one word and say peace, because the EU especially has meant peace for a reasonable amount of time. But I think now maybe it would be more important to try and think not in terms of heritage and what we share in the past, but look at the future and think, can we share a common idea of a better future? Even still daring now to say better future seems almost too much. But I think in these times of crisis, especially, we can see the crisis, medical, climate, and they are related, as an occasion to become Europeans finally, because obviously we haven't been completely. So become European as people that has a common vision for the future. So I see it in this way. So in terms of, instead of the second part of the question, what is the role of the EU in that? I also see it as problematic, but also there is a role, maybe it's an indirect role. As I said, I don't think identities can be created like that by decree. So obviously it cannot create a European identity because that's not how identity come about. But certainly has a tremendous role to play, because this shared story, this shared narrative of being together does come to a great extent from sharing similar experiences. And then obviously there is a circle, not necessarily a causal relationship. And the EU is the institution that has the power to make us be in the same sea, if not in the same boat as European.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And of course, these are difficult questions. And you know, the panel description was, should the EU create a common cultural identity? So I thought we would go back to what is our common cultural identity, because I had a notion that if we just discuss the EU and the EU's role, we would have a very limited and maybe not as fruitful discussion. But thank you on your Holland, your films, of course, touch upon identity and working with European films as well. I think you know a lot. What is our common European identity, and does the EU have a role in creating or adding something to that? Agnieszka Holland, would you care to respond?
Agnieszka.
Yeah, I hope you will hear me, because I have. I'm in the Lisbon hotel, and the connection apparently is not so good, because sometimes your speech is interrupted. Do you hear me well?
Yes, we do.
Okay. So I am only one person here in the panel who is actually doing like creative work as a profession and as a vocation, and I'm living between three countries, between US, Los Angeles, between Poland and France, and I'm working during last 40 years on very international level, shooting my movies and series in the US, but in Poland, also in Czech Republic, in Slovakia, in UK, in Germany. My last movies have been Irish, Polish, Czech and Slovak, and then German, Polish, UK, Ukrainian, and so on. So I'm truly working on pan-European level, and I appreciate it. It means it's not only the financial necessity to put the budget together using different sources and different funds, but also it makes my films more accessible and more interesting for the wider audience. I'm also involved in the work of two filmmaking pan-European organizations. I am the honorary president of FERA, which is the Association of European Film Directors, and also I was for several years the head of the European Film Academy. So my experience is basically on the film level, and the film is probably the most international work. And I have to tell that till the unification of Europe on the level we can observe right now, the European films have been traveling inside of Europe on very high level. And paradoxically, when the Europe started to unite, the interest in the films of different European countries started to diminish, which is the paradox, which I think it's interesting to study, and some reason of that is like constant loss of the curiosity for others. In the moment when Europe becomes united, and united mostly on the economical and political ground, the curiosity about differences and about the similarities on the cultural level started to be less sensitive. And personally, I think that the main problem of European Union, it is that it was that the culture have been neglected from the very beginning, and that what can create exchange, unity in the diversity have been really marginalized and put on the side. I think that about European identity, I don't think that it's totalitarian to think about something like European identity. We have all the same roots. The European culture is coming from Greek, Roman, and Judeo-Christian. And in all countries we are representing here and wider, that is the base for the culture of today. So on this base, we can try to promote the exchange and the diversity.
Thank you so much for this very comprehensive answer. And sorry, I have to keep the time limit, and I have to sometimes try to interrupt you. I'm sorry for that, but we already have a debate, I think, or sort of a debate on the role of the EU, which we will come back after everybody has had their say. But Belhaj from the Netherlands, what's European cultural identity? Should the EU create one?
Thank you. Hi, everybody, this morning. It's a really interesting topic. It's also the most difficult one. And I think I would like first to start that it's clear we have shared values. We embrace the pluralism, the diversity, to be free and equal, to have a functioning democracy, having free press, and being accountable as government. So these are more, you could say, rational themes to address what Europe is and what unites us. But you can also see it's under pressure in different countries. And you can see that everybody's looking for an answer how to address it, and perhaps creating a common culture could be a solution. But I think it's also interesting to think about what you will have when you lose all these principles. Because I'm spokesperson for art. I'm also the president of the art committee of the parliament and spokesperson defense. Everybody thinks it's really strange, but to my opinion, it's really logical, because a lot of times where we're talking about dictator countries or countries we have to intervene to protect people, to give them their freedom, it's interesting to see that mostly they first start with getting rid of critical political opposition, getting rid of critical artists, want to try to get rid of science as an important part of society, and free journalism. So you could also say that our identity perhaps could be looked in what dictators or not democracy are, countries who are not a democracy are doing. So sometimes you realize what you are if you realize what the others don't have, in not in a cynical way. That's the first part. And I know my 2 minutes are up, but the second question, should you create a common culture? I think you should be really careful with doing that. So perhaps also because I have a Muslim Moroccan background, so I know what it is to come from a collective culture and identity. And I became a liberal to make my own choices and decide what kind of identity I want to have. So I think we should be really careful with creating this under pressure common culture.
Thank you very much. And I can only tell you that coming from Hungary and living in Hungary, I can very much empathize with what you said about critical thinking and how critical thinking sometimes attacked both in the past and unfortunately sometimes even the present. Escribano, who I keep calling Mr. Escribano, so I don't have to pronounce your first name, which I'm sure you will tell me how to do.
It's Guillermo in Spanish.
Guillermo.
William in Spanish.
Thank you, and sorry for my my lack of Spanish. So, should the EU create a common cultural identity, and how do you see the common cultural identity as it stands now?
Okay, good morning, everybody. I do agree with many of the things that all our colleagues already said. As Christoph, I had this same experience when I was assigned out of Europe in the Spanish embassy in Manila, in the Philippines. I'm talking now from Warsaw, where I live and work. I was also assigned in Rabat for almost 5 years in Morocco. So Salima, it's a place that's always on my mind and in my heart. And being abroad is where I really felt that there was a sort of European constellation. I don't know how to define it very well. I come from a country in Spain where you might find people in Galicia, in the northwest, that have more similarities, an Atlantic connection with Brittany in France and Ireland. We have the Andalusians that clearly stem from the southern Mediterranean. So in the very definition of our identity, we also should add not only Judeo-Christian, Greek, Roman, Germanic, but also in the case of Spain, clearly the Muslim heritage. So for many, I'm sorry, it's Sunday morning and it's a bit too heavy, but this is very philosophical. Wittgenstein was talking about the illness of identity, and I would take another philosopher, Montesquieu, also European, who always underlined that the best thing of Europeans is the strive to know how others perceive us. And this is my personal experience as well. So in the cultural projects that the European nations do abroad, like the EU film festivals, there's always this interest of knowing how others see us. And so coming back to the question, I would say that the core of what unites us is precisely this reflection, this recognition of the others. It's something that I am really and profoundly proud of being a European. And regarding the need of a common cultural identity, I think that there is, of course, and I'm a bureaucrat here, I'm a civil servant for Spain. I think that there's a need of feeling of belonging and to get away from alterity. So we need that the Europeans have a meaning to know who we are through the relationship with others in this fantastic endeavor, which is getting together 27 countries right now. So yes, European cultural identity, maybe not as a compact concept, but through projects which are already existing. Like, I don't know, Erasmus is the epitome of all of that.
Thank you, and thank you all for these answers. And from now on, we will have a free discussion, which I will try to facilitate with the question. But if anyone would want to speak, raise your hand like this, or just virtually, or write in the chat. Anyway, I will have you go. So I will try to stick with the point where I saw the most debate, because you all agreed that there is some sort of identity, European identity, even if we cannot necessarily define it. But we had sharp opinions on whether the EU or any institution should actively promote that. We've had a skeptical opinion and maybe a more positive opinion. So my question is, if there is such a thing as a European identity, is there any actor, state actor, non-state actor, EU, who should actively encourage that identity, or should it just be left spontaneously? Should it just be left to the citizens? Or there is something we can do, maybe not create a totalitarian identity, but more cultural projects, more political projects, more economic projects? Who and what should be done to promote that identity? And of course, you're free to debate with whatever anyone else said. I don't know who wants to go ahead. There's no order anymore, but someone should.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Yes, of course. What I think is interesting, without saying that the government should oblige it, but I've worked a lot of years in the art scene with musea and ballet companies.
Later, please.
Okay. And what I really feel is that for artists and art, it is a logic way of creating a common identity, not because, am I heard still?
Yes, yes.
Mm-hmm. Okay, not because the government says so, because otherwise it will be propaganda, but because of the openness, the creativity, the mentality always to look beyond borders. I think, and of course in Europe there are specific projects for it, but I think we should perhaps celebrate it more, because I really believe that perhaps artists are the best to look forward, but also to connect without being politic.
So art, certainly one way to create identity. Anyone would like to add or comment on that? Christoph. Christoph, we cannot hear you now.
I'm sorry, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Sorry, what I started to say is, I agree, but I'm, from my practical experience, not too enthusiastic about what I very often see as European cultural cooperation. It has been, as Agnieszka Holland pointed out, it has been just a sort of professional standard in many fields of art, and this is certainly good. And I also support the idea of European cultural capital, even of Eurovision Song Contest, of any kinds of sort of creating public spheres in Europe, inside the European Union, beyond the European Union in many cases, through cultural expression. This is great. But then there's always the danger of things becoming too homogeneous. And this is also something which Agnieszka Holland stressed, the way that our cultural curiosity in what happens beyond the borders can diminish because there are no borders anymore. And borders can be quite fruitful in terms of creating cultural curiosity. So really to want to know what is, say, the Scandinavian film, what is the Portuguese film, what is literature in Switzerland or so. This has become very, very accessible right now. And we see lots of cultural EU-driven cultural projects, all in English, all in a way stereotyping and mainstreaming culture. And this is also a danger in itself. So I'm very cautious when it comes to the idea of the EU as the agent or the actor of creating cultural identity.
Thank you. Agnieszka Holland?
Yes, you know, the question of the identity is very complicated. We are now seeing the a constant battle between two concepts of the identity as well. European, like American, for example, is very similar kind of battle. When you are looking at United States of America today, you see deeply polarized society, which has very little things in common on the ideological or political level, but in the same time, you cannot deny American identity. And we have this kind of the polarizations in many of European countries, like in my native Poland, in UK, and if the race of the right-wing populism will grow, we'll have it in another countries very soon. And that is the opposition between enlightenment and some kind of the dark romanticism. But all of that is rooted in our identity. Those battle between the oppressive and inclusive societies are also the part of our identity. So it is very easy for European audience to understand the messages, the cultural messages, artistic messages coming from different countries. If it is translated on the more universal level, if it's not linked to very specific and very local experiences, we can communicate without translation practically. But what Europe does, Europe is lazy. Europe is lazy, and with all those creative and scientific and financial sources we are very much passive in creating the new venues and the new platforms. And when we compare it with US, for example, technologically, we are totally behind. We didn't create Google, we didn't create Microsoft, we didn't create Mac, we didn't create all what dictates today the way of communicating, and which influences also the cultural exchange and the informational exchange and exchange altogether, the communication. We didn't create Netflix. We didn't create the platform for audiovisual content in Europe, which can respond to the European tastes and European values. And doesn't matter if they are Polish, French, or Spanish, we all feel that we have some cultural difference when compared with the Hollywood concept, for example, of the audiovisual narration. But we don't have the platform for that. We have the local platforms, which are too poor to make something global, and we are wasting the resources we have. And it's why we are colonized ideologically and culturally by the United States, which, as we can see now, are not the example of the extreme good. So I think that this laziness is also due to the concept of European Union, that we've been never focusing on what can create the science and the culture. The science and the culture are the biggest potential of Europe. It's my opinion, and I think that this potential is neglected by politicians.
Thank you so much. Strong words, but I can certainly empathize. We all watched the U.S. elections, so now all my friends know where Pennsylvania is. None of them know where Lodz is, even though it's a lot closer. That's how I see it. Guillermo or Monica, would you care to join in? Guillermo, go ahead, and then I will ask also Salima what politicians can or cannot do in this regard later on.
No, I was listening to all the comments and also to the progress of the conversation. And I think in a way, especially what Agnieszka Holland just said, is an argument for a stronger role of the EU. Not stronger in the sense, let's make a European identity, but stronger as for instance, in promoting innovation in technology, investing in science, investing in art, and let art and science do what they want to do. And then maybe that, that goes towards creating a more compact ensemble. And, there are some of those innovations have actually started in Europe, and then they were developed in the United States, because here the environment is not strong enough to, even if there is the good idea, then it goes away. Often that's the case with technological innovation from Europe. So I think going back to the role of the EU, who has your question was, so if the identity should be left spontaneous, or who has the agency? I don't think there's not one actor that has agency on identity, but obviously the EU has an interest in seeing a European identity develop, because obviously it would make it stronger, but it's not something that can be done directly. It can create a stronger union in other aspects, and then identity may emerge. That's what I think.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Guillermo?
So coming back to what Monica just said, so the EU has been working on identity definition. It started with a Copenhagen Declaration in 1973, which was for many years the only document that was summarizing the core elements of our identity, mentioning the 2 world wars, for instance, the progress of integration as part of the evolution of the EU, and well, then we had the failure of the ambitious Constitution for Europe in 2005 and 2006, which was in a part a failure due to the goal of defining an identity for culture. And since then, there has been a Europe for Citizens program, which was aimed at contributing to citizens' understanding of Europe. So the EU is actually trying to do things in the realm of identity that hasn't been effective. And coming back to what Agnieszka said, maybe, of course, we should be fostering other kind of projects. Many in my country say that they would like to have a European Netflix. A lot of series, which are part of the conversation now in the younger generations, have various, the West Wing in the European version of how things are happening in the Commission, more biopics of key figures like Simone Weil, Robert Schuman. Those are excellent biographies, and maybe it could also help to connect people and create this stronger identity.
Thank you. So Salima, I will turn to you now, because Agnieszka Holland talked about the role of politicians and what they can and cannot do. And of course, I don't want you to represent all politicians, but as our only politician on the panel, please say something about those.
Thank you. Yeah, because if I represent them all, I will have a hard time. I can only be responsible for my own policies. I think, first of all, also after what everybody said, I think it's important that nowadays we're not only focusing staying together, but also that we need to be aware that some big countries are trying to divide us. And for us in politics, it's also important to make people aware of it. And of course, we're talking about disinformation, disruptive initiatives from Russia, threatening and on that way dividing us and making us perhaps more nationalistic than we would ever be. And in that process, they are achieving what they want, because if we are becoming more nationalistic because everybody becomes scarce, everybody wants to have an overview of his personal life and identification with people in their own countries, you also see then that you are not trying to also win the next economical war, because if you're all getting back in your national identities and politics, you will give it away to China. So in a sense, I think for politicians, it is important to try to explain what is happening in a broader context. And also prohibit that once you have a nationalistic populistical party, for instance, in your country, it's really hard, because they are in power, it's really hard to push it back. And then it's already too late. So I really hope that a lot of people or politicians fight now. Now we need to fight. For instance, yesterday I was at a demonstration about abortion. I never thought it was necessary, but because of what happened in Poland, I was so aware of the fact that it's important. Because if you let it go, you think, no, it will not happen. So I think it's important for politicians to be aware what is happening in international context and try to explain and also fight for it in politics, but also sometimes at demonstrations.
Thank you for I think those very important words in the Freedom Games, which is of course international, but also from Luce in Poland. I'm sure that's a very important message. Christoph and then Agnieszka Holland.
Yes, while listening to you, I thought, maybe the European cultural policy, be it identitarian or not. Maybe it's not too strong, as many Europhobics might say, but it's rather too weak compared to some enemies of European values. And take China as an example, gaining ground both ideologically and technologically. Take the United States, always the winner when it comes to technology. Ideologically, not in the way that I would see one single agent or actor or creator of ideology, but somehow infiltrating also the world with some sort of American ideas and ideals. So maybe the European Union should become stronger in terms of its cultural policies. This has the technological aspect of somehow creating platforms and media which are strong enough to match, and reconsidering ideology, which is difficult because as the constitution of Europe and the ideal and the values are always liberal values, the question remains whether you can create strong cultural policies by liberal means. And this is for me an open question.
And a very important one, just one technical note, the organizers did allow me that as we started 8 minutes late, we'll conclude 8 minutes late. So we will conclude at 11:53. That gives us 9 more minutes on this topic. Agnieszka Holland, please go ahead.
I'm really grateful that you mentioned the anti-abortion and pro-abortion movement in Poland, because it shows how much the Polish youth became connected to the ideas of human rights, liberal freedoms, and the necessity of the free choice. And it was a huge surprise to everybody inside Poland, even, that the reaction of the young people, and especially young women, was so strong and so massive. And it happens after several years of the right-wing and nationalistic and Catholic brainwashing, where we thought that this youth, which seems to be passive, is practically connected to the conservative agenda, and it is not. And what are the examples for them? It's Europe. And that is, that is the fruit also of Erasmus program, of the exchange, of the consumption of Western content, and we see how much they can connect in this moment with the international and European movements of the kind. So I think that what we need really as a Europe, we need the story which can connect us somehow. And we had those stories in the past. It was first for the centuries, the Christianity, then it was Enlightenment, French Revolution, human rights, then it was nationalistic pulsions and, Industrial Revolution, nationalism which led to the fascism, Nazism, and the Second World War and the Holocaust. On another side, some other movement of the kind were led to the communism and the Stalinism as an effect of that. And the experience of the Second World War, it was global European experience which created the Union. It's what created the European Union. It was this vaccination against the nationalism which Holocaust caused, the experience of the Holocaust and the Nazism. Unfortunately, this vaccine is evaporating, so we are coming back to the point zero, maybe, and trying to end the fight or the struggle between the nationalism and the Enlightenment is continuing in our days in different forms, of course, because the world is changing and the new challenges and the new dangers appeared, which made people scared as it was before, but in different way. And the culture here and the story, which is attractive, understandable, accessible, and uniting, is something which we really need. So I don't think that it's, you know, that is the opposition between having the national identity and European identity. It's some fatality. We can really make it one.
Thank you very much. Guillermo, Monica, maybe any of you would like to comment on that, also on the notion of, is there a European story that we can tell after all this?
I really like that. It is, you know, what I was trying to say at the beginning, maybe there is a core, but if there isn't an awareness of the core, if there isn't the story that tells you that there is the core, then it's as if the core is not there. So the importance of the story is immense. And in fact, one aspect where the EU is lacking is in education. I don't want to say that we have to all study the same history book, of course, but the education is still very, very strongly in the hands of nation states, and it can be quite, this could be something to work on. But yeah, this thing of the joint story is very interesting. I really like this image of the vaccination and the vaccination now expiring, especially because vaccines are at the moment very much in the mind of everyone and we really think about them. And I was wondering what is then the new vaccine and whether this crisis we now have can be used to unite us rather than divide us. I mean, that's the hope, but I guess we will see that. And the joint story that has to be accessible and understood, that's has been a bit of a problem. Often the stories that have been tried to be told about European identity were too complex. That was the problem with the Constitution, for instance. It was far too complex as well as not shared, really. And so that was a bit why I was trying to say maybe that it needs to be a story that is as much about the future as it is about the past. It is important to remember the past. Of course, we are selective because on what we remember and what we forget. And a joint story is about forgetting together as much as about remembering together. But it should also be about what we can do in the future. And in that sense, I think certainly the story cannot come from the EU as an institution, but it has to emerge from society, even though what that is, it can always be difficult to say. Yeah.
Thank you. Guillermo, I think in this round, if you haven't spoken yet, any comments on the European story, the European narrative, or what can unite us in these times?
Well, what I think as a summary is that the problems that afflict the European institutions stem in large part from the weakness of this European cultural identity. It is my personal opinion that it should be reinforced somehow. I'm not talking about shaping an artificial identity or story, but maybe I would compare it to the football teams all over Europe, which have had this aspiration of winning in Europe as their main goal. And if there is a European sport, European culture, European science, European media and internet-based communication, which shapes common practices. This is the story of the future. This trying to build in common practices that are positive for every country and all our citizens.
Thank you. Well, it is 11:53, and even though our clock shows 5 more minutes, but I was told to stop at 11:53. But if any of you have any extremely important words to say, now is the time. Agnieszka Holland, very briefly.
Yes, I want to just repeat, maybe with the higher voice, what I said. Where European Union can help, it's in creation of pan-European powerful platform.
Thank you, and thank you
communication.
Thank you for staying brief. thank you all. I am a big fan of going out of our bubbles and having politicians, filmmakers, academics, cultural diplomats sit down. But of course, it also makes the moderator's job more difficult and the organizer's job more difficult. But I think we did manage to use our time to the best. Thank you all for contributing. Thank you all of you who have joined to watch us. I think very important messages here on European cultural identity, and also to European decision makers if they have watched us. Thank you so much, and do tune in to the other panels of the Freedom Games as well. This panel now stops. Christoph, Guillermo, Monica, Agnieszka, and Salima, thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Be safe.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
You too.